Do you want your online store to be ultra-fast, fully customized to your needs, and scalable to more than 1 billion items? IMEOS is an ultra-fast PHP e-commerce framework. IMEOS, next level e-commerce. Try it now.
If you're running an application at scale in public or private clouds, you have to tame almost boundless complexity. Datadog brings together all this observability data with infrastructure metrics, traces, and logs in one integrated platform.
Vonage is a cloud communication platform that lets you integrate voice, video, and messaging into your applications. We have a load of helper libraries, including a Laravel package and a client library for PHP. You can find out more about us at developer.nexmo.com.
Hi, I'm Bouwmann. It's so awesome that we can still have a Laracon EU this way. So you can find me on GitHub and Laracast and Twitter by using this handle. And I've been contributing for the past 5 years to Laracast by answering questions on the forum. I'm one of the top contributors there and I really enjoy doing that. So if you want to learn more about Laravel or get your questions answered, you should go there. I work at a company called Enrise where we build high quality internet applications. And I'm part of Team Artisans, where we mostly develop APIs in Laravel, which are connected to mobile apps built in React Native. And you can guess who came up with the name. Let's talk Laravel secrets. So let's dive into the editor. So Laravel has a built-in exception handler. This class is very powerful because it handles all our exceptions for us. So it either makes sure we get a whoops page, or we get a nice error message, or a 404, or we get the stack trace if we're on local development. If we go to this class itself, in here we have the exception handler. So this is the base class that we use. And in here we have the report and the render method. So let's create our own exception. So PHP artisan make exception, and let's call this not all bills paid exception. Well, this has been created. Now, if we're going in here, we can see that we have this class now. And it's just an empty class which extends the default exception from PHP. So if we go to our web route, we can create an exception here. So let's just throw an exception here. So we can say throw new not all bills paid exception. So whenever we throw this exception, we can see what kind of error we get in the browser. So let's go to the browser. And in here, if I go to the new route we created, so we call it exception, we get this nice error exception. And it's very clear what the exception was, and we can provide a message to it if we want to. But in this case, it just says this exception has been thrown. So this is being handled by the render method in this case, because it sees an exception and it knows, okay, we need to do something with this, so let's render it in the browser. We also have a payment route available. So if I'm going to payment, you can see that there is a payment page, and this one does nothing at this point. Because we have this custom exception, we can handle it different ways. So in here, in our handler class, we can say we want to do something else while rendering this exception. So in this case, we can say if the exception is an instance of the not all bills paid exception. If that is the case, what action do we want to perform? So in this case, we say return redirect, and we redirect to the payment route. So redirect payment. So that's the route where we want to go. So if I'm going back to the route here, and if I go to the exception class, to the exception route, and I press enter, I'm being redirected to the payment page. So this works all fine. But what happens if you have 10 of these exceptions, or you have 20 different exceptions, and they all have a different case? Well, in this case, this will get really messy if you need to duplicate all of this all the time. So Laravel has something really cool built in, and that is the render method on the exception class itself. And the same goes for the report method. We can do for the reporting stuff the same thing. So the render method is for displaying the exception in the browser or in your API. So that can be the JSON response that belongs to that exception. And the report method is about what you want to do with the exception. So do you want to write it to your log files, or if you want to write it to an external party like Sentry or Flare. So let's go to this exception class, and let's add our method here. So we can say here public function render, and in here we can do whatever we want in here. So in this case I can say return redirect to a certain route, which is payment. So we enter the same functionality, and let's make this final. So in that case we can remove this. So this is not needed anymore, and as you can see, we'll see that this will do the same thing. So if I'm going to exception, I'm being redirected to payment again. So if I remove this method again, and we go to exception again, we get the exception. So this works the same as defining it in your handler method. And as I said before, it's really important to decide if you want to do this in your exception class, be specific in your exception class, or in your handler class. One benefit of using it in your exception class is also that you're removing all this logic from one place and moving it to the explicit exception class. And in here we can also define another method called report. And you can do in here whatever you want. So write to a log, Sentry maybe, or even Flare. So you can do whatever you want in here, and this probably shouldn't return anything. So we can clean this up again, and now we have the same action working out here. So if I'm diving into the render method itself, we can see that Laravel has a lot of logic in here, but the first thing is it checks if the exception itself has a render method. And then it will convert that render method to a response. And you can also implement the responsible interface. So in here, instead of defining all of this, let's just try that. We can say implements responsible interface, and this method requires us to add the toResponse method. And in here we get a request, and we can return something in here. In this case, it should also be a redirect. So let's see if we do this one. We return the redirect route again and to the payment. So if I'm going now to /exception, we're being redirected again. So this works the same. So there are different ways of doing this, and it just depends on your need on how you want to do this. The interface itself helps you to enforce that you have this method available. So the render method isn't required, but the toResponse method in this case is required because of the interface. So if you have a lot of exceptions that look alike, but they have a different render method, then the responsible interfaces can be really useful here. So let's go back to the Laravel handler. And in here you can also see that there are other exception classes being catched by Laravel, and they render in a certain way. For example, the validation exception is being rendered in a different way, where it, let's see, we can click through here to invalid, where it always returns you to the previous page with the input and with errors. So that's why it always works that if you submit a form and you're being redirected back to the previous page, that you can see the previous input using the old method, because it's available, because the exception class helps in this case to add this data to the redirect. Let's go to the next secret. So I'm just going to clean up here. I'm just going to check out the other branch. We call it validation exception. And I just need to make sure that everything has been cleaned here. Migrate fresh and see it again. So I'm just going to close all of this up. Okay, and we're ready to go. So validation exceptions. We already showed you just a minute ago that the validation exception itself is being called by Laravel. However, the validation exception itself can be really useful because whenever your form input fails, it will return back to the previous page and also return the messages that has been sent along. So it gives you the translations of these messages. For example, if you have a username which is required and needs to be at least 6 characters, if you fill in 5 characters, you get an array back with data with the username as key, and then there's an error message which says you need at least 6 characters. This functionality is really useful, and we can use this validation inside our controllers. But sometimes you need something more expressive, or you need to check something in a different way, and that's where the validation exception comes in. So let's open up this post controller that I created, post controller. And in here we have just the default controller. We can create a post. We have this store method. We can create a new post. And in here we have the validation inside the store method. And whenever this validation fails, it will throw a validation exception, redirect you back to the previous page, and fill in the data for you automatically. So this is just the basic stuff. And we have different ways to validate this. We can also use a post request. So post request. That's also possible. Then we don't need to do this anymore. And then we can just say request all. So this works the same way. So either we do the validation inside the post request class. As you can see here, we have the rules here, or we do them in the controller itself. So these are some basic ways to validate a request, or in this case, creating a post. However, sometimes you need something more expressive. In our case, we have posts and we can publish them. So there is a publish post controller. And this method has a show method. So we can show the post itself and publish it. And we have a store method to actually publish the post. And this will just publish the post for us and redirect us back to the previous page. Now, if I'm going to this route, so there's a route available for this post. So let me just go to the browser and open up this publish page. So we have publish / the ID of the post. So we have one post called Laracon EU becomes Laracon online. And there's this big button to publish it. And if we press it, it will be published. However, we want to add some extra validation, which cannot be done in the normal request. So normally we would check on certain things. In this case, we want to add something else. So in this case, we can, for example, say if the post is not reviewed. If that is the case, then we want to throw a validation exception. So this is a Laravel exception. And in here we can say with messages, and we can provide an array with a key value array where we can say what the problem is. So for example, we can say the published ad field. So that's just the name we give it, published ad. And then we can say a message. So the post needs to be reviewed before it can be published. I see I didn't type that correct. Okay. So that's it. So this is some extra validation we can't do another place, and that's why we use this validation exception. And normally I would use this this approach whenever I'm using an extra API call to calculate something where we don't create a custom rule to do that. So that's an alternative. You can create custom rules to check these things as well. In our case, this is a really specific case only for publishing the post. So creating a rule for it for itself is also an option, but we choose to do it this way. And another benefit of this is that we don't have to actually post to this field to validate it, because there's no fields posted here. There's nothing posted here. We just say, hey, there's a validation exception, you can't continue, and throw this exception. And the Laravel handler will automatically catch the exception and return you back to the previous page. So if I'm going back to the page and now press this button, we get the error message here. As expected, right? Because the post isn't reviewed yet, that database column hasn't been set. So now we get this error message. So if I'm going to the publish page, publish.blade.php, and in here we have some logic. So if the post is published, we get the option to publish it. So there's just this small form that just posts to this form and nothing else. There's no fields posted here. So one important thing here is that to display the error message, we check if the published at field is available in the errors array. It's really important that we check on this field, because if we don't check on this field, we don't see the error message. So whatever field we define in here will also be available in here as one of the validation errors. In this case, that is just the message we show. So it's really important to always catch the exception in the front end if you use this approach to do some extra validation in your controllers. And note that you can perform this action anywhere. If you're in a service class or in a different place where you are actually handling the request or doing something with it, so not in jobs but handling the request somewhere else, you can use this approach to throw a custom exception, in this case the validation exception, provide the messages, and you will be redirected back to the previous page, or it will be converted to a JSON response automatically for you. I hope that's an approach you can use in the future. Let's just go to the next secret. So let me clean everything up, and we're going to check out the next one. So, and let's run PHP artisan migrate fresh seed. Okay, awesome. So models in Laravel are really cool. So a model is a class that represents a table row in the database. So each field that's available in your table is also available in your model. So let me just open up the one of the DOMs of the user. So in here we have a user object. And as you can see, all these fields are available inside the database. And they are just the regular values that are showed in the database as well. So the birthday field, in this case, is just a daytime field in the database. The phone field is a text string in the database, and so on. And then we have the array presentation of this object. And this one uses already a different syntax for the values. As you can see here, the dates itself, they have a different format. There's now an extra T in there. And there's the milliseconds and the time zone. And as you can see here for the birthday column, which is here a date, here it's an integer with the age of the user. So if I'm going to the user model, we can see here that we have different attributes here. So we have all the available fields. We have the cast array, so the email verified and the birthday are being cast to datetime objects. And then we have this accessor. So there's this syntax get field attribute. So in this case, birthday, where we will parse the date and return the age as an integer. And we have the phone relationship here. And we have the phone attribute here. So as you can see, there's already something happening here, because our user model returns a string here. It's just a string. But we also have a relationship phone created. And this is not being returned. We only get this phone field back. So this is the mystery we're going to figure out today. So if I'm opening up the user page, in here we have just the user object. And if I'm just doing the user birthday here, so let me just echo that out. And I refresh here, we just get the number back because that's the accessor behind it. And as you can see, we also have a cast available for this one, and we have an attribute here available. It is returning the age here and not the date time. So what's going on there? So every model in Laravel extends the base model class. So in this case, Laravel extends here authenticatable for some extra stuff that a user needs. So if we're going in here, we can see that even this class also extends the base model class. And this is the one we want. And this base model class makes all these models really accessible and adds all these awesome features. And as you can see here, there's a bunch of features you can see already by just looking at the trait names. It has attributes, events, relationships, timestamps, it's all in there. So the method we're looking for is the get method. And the get method is a static PHP method that can be used to access any property on your object. So let's go there, get the get method. So whenever we call, for example, user phone, it will pass this phone as the key here. So this will be phone. And then it will be passed to the next method. And so that also goes for the other one. So if I do birthday, then birthday will be passed and so on. So if you have a relationship, for example, user has post. If you just do post, then post will be put into here, and then Laravel will return the relationship eventually. And all the magic is in this get attribute method, which lives in the has attributes trait. In here we can already see how Laravel does this. So it checks if the attributes exist on the model. Then it checks for the get mutator, and in Laravel land we call that an accessor. And then it checks if it's castable or not. So it either checks if it's in a castable array or if there's a castable class associated with this attribute. And if that's the case, then we return that value. If no attribute exists or no cast exists or there's no accessor, then we simply move to the next part where we determine if it's a method. Then we don't do anything. And if that's not the case, then we look for the relationship. So then it will either do a one-to-many or a one-to-one, a many-to-many, and so on. And in here we can see the order. So in the get attributes value method, we can see how the model will return the value. So in here we have this transform model value method. And in here we grab the value from the attributes array that's on our model. So if we would put in here phone, so if we put in here phone, then phone will be retrieved from the model. That value will be used and passed to the transform model value method. And this method decides the order. So first it checks for a mutator, then it checks for a cast, and eventually it checks for the date time, and otherwise it just returns the value. So in here we can already see what the actual order is. So accessors always go first, then casts, then the attribute itself. And if none of these attributes exist, then the relationship is tried. And if none of those exist, then you probably get an exception because PHP can't find the property. So we're going back to our user model, and as you can see in here, we have this birthday cast and we have this accessor. So this accessor always goes first. So if we remove this accessor, we can see that the birthday now is being transformed to a date time instead. So if I refresh here, we can see that the birthday is being returned to a date time now. And as you can see here as well. So that's where we echo out the birthday itself. And the same goes for the phone field. So let's say we have, we've previously had the phone number stored on the user. And now we decided that we want to make this a separate database, or database table, and move this to a relationship. So if we don't remove the phone number from the user object itself, so there the attribute still exists, then the relationship will never work. Because the attribute always goes before any relationships. So it will work if you just call the phone. So let's say if we do user phone, and let me just remove all of these here. And let's do a dump. So we can just dump out what this will return. So if we directly ask for the relationship, it will work. But if we just directly ask for the phone just as a property, it won't work. So if I refresh here, you can see here that we get the number here. So that's the number stored on the user model. And in here we get the relationship. So it actually works. There actually is a relationship working here, but only if we use the method directly. But instead we just want to use phone to retrieve the relationship. So we need to remove this column from the database. Let's do php artisan make migration delete phone users table. So this has been created now. And in here we can say table drop column, and in here we pass the phone. And let's not do anything in the down method. Okay, so PHP artisan migrate. So the column has been removed. If I now refresh here, we can see now we get the phone relationship back. So now we get the phone relationship, it has a user ID and it has a number. So this works completely differently from using an accessor or a relationship. So it's important to know this order. So if something is wrong with your application or you are expecting weird behavior, understanding this approach is really important to prevent those issues. So the order is always accessor, cost, attribute, relationship. Let's go to the next secret. So I went ahead and did all the changes for you, so you don't have to watch it for me. Okay. Let's open up the event source provider. So the event source provider. And this is the heart in Laravel for events and listeners. So whenever you have an event and you want to perform an extra action for it, it can either be queued or you just want to perform extra actions, but you don't want to define all of them in your controllers or in your service classes. This is the perfect place to define them. And Laravel automatically comes with the first event and listener. So that's the registered class and the send email verification notification. So this is the perfect example of doing an event and a listener. So whenever someone is registered, we want to send them an email, and we can either queue the notification class or not. That just depends on you. However, Laravel itself also fires a lot of different events while using the application. So we're not going over all of them, just a few of them. So don't worry, we won't be sitting here for the next 2 hours. So the first one is, let me just show you a few of them. So for example, whenever you log into the application, Laravel will fire this login event. And by default, Laravel itself doesn't fire any listeners for that. And for most of these events, Laravel doesn't fire any listeners. They're mostly there for other developers that want to hook into these actions inside the application. So for example, if you're using the cache a lot, and whenever you write something or put something in the cache, an event is being triggered, which is called key written. And whenever you forget a key from the cache, there's this event called key forgotten. So the same goes for sending emails, or whenever an email has been sent, there are events for that. If you have a scheduler running and the event has started, there's an event for that. Or if there is a task finished in the scheduler, there's an event for that. And the list goes on and on for all those cool things. One thing I won't show you today are all the events that are triggered within Laravel around models. So there's a lot of model events as well when creating them or deleting them or updating them, but that can use its own separate talk. I just want to finish up with the command events. So Laravel also has these events whenever you start a command or you finish it, you can hook into that. So in this case, whenever a commando starts, I want to add the output. I want to add a logo output to this command. And whenever it's finished, I want to add a finish message to it as well. So how does this work? So Laravel fires this event for us whenever we start the command. And then we have this class. So in here, we have a handle method. So each listener has its handle method. And we get the actual event, so the command starting event. And we can add something to the output. So the event has the output. And we can write something to the output, and it will be added before the command executes. So let me just turn off this one, and then I can show you how this works. So in here, if I type PHP artisan version, you can see that we now echo out the logo, and then we added echo out the Laravel framework number. And this works now for all the commands. So if I do view clear, it just works. Or even PHP artisan migrate. Nothing to migrate. And we always show the logo. So this is a really bold logo, but you can add like a company name or another message. So let's clear this and add the other message as well. So we're going to add this one as well. And if we're looking into this one, it has a handle method as well, and it gets a random message and writes it to the line as well. So this will be, in here we have the output as well. And whenever we write a line, we will append it to the already current output that's available. So whenever the command started will be fired, then we write something to the output, which will be given to the command itself, which will write something to the output. And then in the finished command, we get the output that's already been generated from before, and we just write something to that one. So let's perform another query here. So let's do PHP version. And now we get an extra message here. Thank you for using Laravel. Or another message. And right now we're doing boring stuff, right? We're just echoing out something. And it's pure fun to do it. But there's also other things you can do with it. If, for example, you have a command that has been finished. So in here we have the event. We can get the command string as well. And in here we can do some checks. If it's this command, then I want to write something to Slack. Or if it's this command, I want to perform another query or another action. So this way it's really powerful, and you can put all this logic in just one or two listeners, and you just have to define it here, and there's no extra logic needed in your commands itself. So I hope that was really interesting for you and that you learned something new today. Definitely go dive into the framework and see if you can find other cool stuff that's going on in the background. My buddy Steve and I are writing a book called Laravel Secrets, and it contains a ton of these things. And so we're still working on it. It's a lot of work, but we're already making some progress. If you want to learn more about this as well, you can sign up at laravelsecrets.com. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Do you want your online store to be ultra-fast, fully customized to your needs, and scalable to more than 1 billion items? Imios is an ultra-fast PHP e-commerce framework. Imios, next level e-commerce. Try it now.
If you're running an application at scale in public or private clouds, you have to tame almost boundless complexity. Datadog brings together all this observability data with infrastructure metrics, traces, and logs in one integrated platform.
Vonage is a cloud communication platform that lets you integrate voice, video, and messaging into your applications. We have a load of helper libraries, including a Laravel package and a client library for PHP. You can find out more about us at developer.nexmo.com.